I finally arrived at the airport after a 4 hour early morning drive on a freezing wet winter day. My new companions were already there. A perfect balance: two couples, three single women, including me, and three single men, aged anywhere between 19 and 45. A talkative group that somehow felt familiar from the very first moment. I had been single for 4 years back then, and it wasn't my first trip with complete strangers since my divorce. But this one was slightly different. A sailing trip in Greece around the Saronic Islands at the end of December, stretching into the new year. I had sailed as a teenager almost every year and even obtained a license for small two-sail boats on lakes, but never on the sea. My friends thought it was a crazy idea. Rain, storms, closed marinas, and quiet islands with very little happening. They tried to talk me out of it, but I didn't give in. I dreaded spending another New Year's Eve in Poland as the only single person at a party full of couples. And this felt like the perfect escape. Perhaps a good way to start 2005 as well. We landed in Athens in the afternoon and went straight to the marina to board the Bavaria 42, our floating home for the next 7 days. After that, we headed to a nearby supermarket to buy provisions. Most tavernas, especially along the coast, would be closed at that time of a year, so we would rely mainly on our own cooking. The plan was to buy fresh fish from local fishermen along the way whenever possible. For the first few days, we stocked up on everything we might need: food, plenty of wine, and of course a bottle of raki, maybe two. Our skipper suggested we cook in turns and in pairs, with the others responsible for cleaning up. But to everyone's surprise, I volunteered to take the charge of the cooking, as long as I was given a sous chef. I had been enjoying cooking for a few years by then, but mostly for myself and a handful of friends. Cooking for 10 people was something else entirely. Still, I liked the idea of it. The next morning, we woke to overcast skies and about 15 degrees. Quite mild for that time of the year. But the forecast for the following days wasn't promising. Rain, strong winds. I had brought a good rain jacket, but not proper waterproof sailing gear like many of the others. My plan was simple. If the weather turned nasty, I would stay below deck, even though I had been warned that seasickness was usually worse down there. Apparently, many of us would end up leaning over the rails sooner or later. I was convinced that I wouldn't. After a quick breakfast, we set off towards Aegina, one of the larger islands and our first stop. The wind was still gentle, and everybody was enjoying the fresh sea air, laughing and playing with the sails. That evening, I announced dinner: spaghetti with my own improvised tomato sauce, onions, garlic, herbs, and a generous splash of red wine. It was simple and quick, so we decided to cook once we were safely docked in the marina. A few curious observers gathered in the small galley, slightly shocked by the amount of wine that went into the pan. 30 minutes later, dinner was served. Everyone loved it. From that moment on, I was officially proclaimed the master chef of the boat. The next day, after a short walk around the marina in Aegina and buying fresh fish from a local fisherman for dinner, we set off towards our next island. The clouds were getting darker. The wind was picking up. Everyone was preparing for a downpour, except me. My plan was still to escape below deck if things got too unpleasant. We hadn't been sailing for long before the storm hit. The boat was bouncing heavily on the waves. The sails were flapping violently in the gusts. Everyone was gripping the rails to stay upright. There was no chance I was going to stay up there and get soaked. I stuck to my plan: below deck. As I carefully made my way down the steps, I heard our skipper shouting behind me, "You'll get seasick down there, you'll see." Nope, I thought. And remembering the miraculous digestive powers of grappa after a heavy Italian dinner, I came up with my own solution: a shot of raki, the Greek cousin of grappa, with black pepper. Without hesitation, the strange mixture disappeared down my throat, and surprisingly, it seemed to calm my stomach almost immediately. All good, at least for the moment. But reading while being bounced around the cabin quickly proved to be a terrible idea. So, another thought crossed my mind: why not start cooking? It was still a little early, but in those conditions, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. There was only one problem. This was my first sailing trip, and I had absolutely no experience cooking in a moving kitchen. Still, a few minutes later, I found myself standing, or rather trying to stay upright, in the galley. The plan was simple: baked fish, peperonata on the side, and pears cooked in red wine with mascarpone for dessert. Chopping garlic and peppers while trying to balance against the movement of the boat turned out to be far more difficult than expected. "Are you okay down there, Anya?" One of the crew members leaned into the saloon to check on me. What he saw must have looked quite strange. Me performing awkward acrobatics with a large knife, desperately trying to keep a bouncing onion on the chopping board. "Don't tell me you're cooking in this weather." He was one of the older members of the crew, an experienced sailor and apparently immune to seasickness. "Do you need help?" "Yeah, I wouldn't say no to a partner in kitchen acrobatics," I shouted back, laughing. Tom climbed down the steps, his waterproof jacket dripping. A fit, well-trained guy in his 40s, and, like me, recently divorced. "You were smart to stay under deck," he said. I just smiled and handed him a bulb of garlic. "Start with this." A lot of garlic. For the fish and for the peperonata, a simple Italian dish I had learned from my ex-mother-in-law. Red peppers slowly fried in olive oil with what felt like an unreasonable amount of garlic. Outside, the storm was still in full force. Inside, the kitchen wasn't much calmer. The boat lurched without warning, and every movement had to be adjusted mid-action. Pans slid, peppers tried to escape, and every now and then I had to grab the counter just to stay upright. I felt a brief moment of sympathy for the others outside, soaked by the rain. But then another wave hit, and I wasn't entirely sure if I had chosen the easiest option. Tom turned out to be an excellent sous chef. Somehow, between the movement, the laughter, and the occasional near disaster, we made progress. 10 fish made it into the oven, which, at that point, felt like a small miracle. And then the smell started to drift through the boat. Garlic first, then peppers, then the fish. From time to time, a head appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn in by the promise of dinner. I was just finishing the cream for the pears in red wine when I heard our skipper shouting orders. We were approaching Poros, a small island in the surrounding Gulf. The storm had eased a little, and there was a quiet sense of relief on board after a long day at sea. The timing was almost perfect. The peperonata was ready, the fish needed just a few more minutes. By the time we finally sat down, everyone was soaked, tired, and very hungry. And then it all came together. 10 people. 2 days earlier, we had been complete strangers. Now we were sharing a meal in a tiny cabin somewhere between wind, waves, and garlic. There was Greek wine, and of course raki, this time slightly less medicinal. And as always, the best part wasn't even the food. It was that quiet moment when everyone relaxes, eats, and smiles. Probably not the easiest dinner I've ever made, but definitely one of the most memorable.